Good evening. I'm Professor Alastair Sinclair Smythe. A young boy named Johnny is out exploring a cave with his family on a picnic. He encounters a couple of archaeologists and later suffers a fall, whereupon he has an elaborate fantasy about Earth being attacked by Romen, powerful robotic beings, and the problems associated with being the last people on Earth, and the desire of Roman to destroy them all, despite the effect this has upon his psychology when he realizes that there's more to life than merely obeying orders. In the end, he wakes up from the dream, and it appears to all be alright. Or is it? Johnny has a particular interest in space technology. He has his own spacesuit and a toy gun, and he seems to feel that the best way to live is to be a rough-enough astronaut fighting off alien monsters. This will incorporate into his view later on, since he is more interested in doing things like fighting off bad aliens, at least to pretend, than doing dumb things like playing with his little sister at house. This worldview is very important later on, as it incorporates into his fantasy, thus showing that a person who is obsessed with one particular thing rather than living in the real world will have their worldview and their psyche likewise affected. The aspects of Johnny's real life will be likewise enfolded into his fantasy in terms of setting the people he knows into certain roles. His mother and sister are relatively unaffected, as is his younger sister, but he takes the role of the archaeologist and his assistant, folding it into his idea of the assistant being romantically involved with his sister. He seems to be just becoming interested in that sort of thing, and the professor now cast as his father. It's possible he doesn't have a father anymore, possibly having been killed in the recent war. This means that everything associated with his real life is being shaped into his current fantasy, including the idea of a alien invasion, the destruction of all other life on the planet, and the idea that he and his family are the sole survivors and thus are most suited to fight back against the invading Roman, casting himself, and those he knows, as the heroes. The Roman, despite looking rather childish, understandable given the fact that he is created from a child's mind, has a conundrum. Since humanity is the only other comparably powerful race in the universe, it is only logical that the robotic race should destroy them, and the fact that the few people have survived using their ingenuity is a severe threat to the overall plan. It is therefore necessary to destroy them in a perfectly logical way, if not by one weapon then by another, in order to fulfill the goal for the larger, much more sensible and logical computerized mind to be able to accomplish its task. Here we see the literal nature of technology, in particular machines, following a set task regardless of outside circumstances, and adapting poorly to changing circumstances, especially those given to irrational, illogical organic beings, and attempting to follow the same path despite the difficulties this causes in the overall program. This corruption becomes manifest when Roman develops an unnatural attraction to Johnny's older sister Alice. He finds that he is unable to reconcile these new feelings with his purely logical nature, and attempts to do such things as rationalize Alice's survival, though he is still perfectly willing to destroy the rest of the family, and even attempting to find a way to bring her with him, at the very least delay her death, until the very last, in order to carry out his programming and still be able to understand this new feeling he's having. His statement of, "I must, yet I cannot," leading to a near breakdown of a logic loop, is a clear example of how irrational behavior can interfere with purely logical behavior and conflict, as opposed to a balanced mind which is able to incorporate the logical and the irrational in a sensible, coherent, workable manner. In the end, the choices are made. Johnny attempts to distract the Roman so the family can rescue Alice, and fail. Johnny is killed by Roman, And the Supreme Commander back at their home planet has decided that Roman's irrational behavior, purely illogical by the computerized standards, is cause for his destruction, shuts him down, and initiates the complete destruction of the Earth. Likewise accompanied by stock footage, as exemplified by Johnny's dream. You know, that's something he'd probably seen on the television or perhaps in a movie that he loves so much, showing that the logical behavior cannot understand or fully cope with irrational emotional behavior, and the full solution is to destroy everything in order to break the logic loop and continue with pure mathematical probabilities and program responses, rather than attempts to reconcile them and possibly damage the logical aspects that they've worked by for so long. If I cannot understand it, I will destroy it. At the end of the story, Johnny is awakened with only a mild head injury and is taken away to his family. As he leaves, we see a succession of Roman emerging from the cave. This is not so much an indication that the dream may have been a prophecy, as the fact that our natures are constantly at battle. We have a wild, unemotional nature, and we have a logical side which attempts to rationalize the world in sensible, logical ways, and these two will be forever in conflict. As Johnny grows up, he will also enter into this conflict in his daily life, and the Roman emerging from the cave in a half-spectral manner is evident of the fact that we all have to face these choices, even the people in the audience. And unless we find a way to rationalize and compile the logical and the emotional, we too will become just as inherently destructive and unable to cope with new circumstances as the Roman. So this film combines childlike wonder with Johnny's ability to reconcile fantasy elements into elements of his real life in the course of his dream, the eternal struggle between our attempts to make rational sense of the world and our emotional idea of imagination, the irrational nature of love, since it goes against logical, purely rational behavior, and the general idea that there will be a constant battle between these, though they will probably not involve men in gorilla suits with diving helmets on their heads. I have been Professor Alastair Sinclair Smythe. Good evening,